Good. Hello. Maybe you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us what led you to working at the university a couple of years ago.
Well, I was born and raised in South Korea, and I moved to America in my teens. And I do actually come from, there's a personal history. Korean War did separate my family, and some members ended up being taken to North Korea. This is not that unusual. It actually happened to a lot of people. They estimate like 1 million plus families were affected by that back in 1953. And having grown up with that separation, sorrow, then I became an immigrant to going to America in my teens, where I didn't speak a word of English. So I think that really was a big issue. And then I went to North Korea by chance in 2002 for the first time. Mm-hmm. And then I realized there was this world that was basically a wound, heartbreak for Korean people that is not being, in a way, explained in a way we can understand. I kept going back in, and there's no way you can go find out about North Korea except seeing the government's propaganda. You will just never see it. So what that meant was, and I went 5 times through a decade, and what that meant was you would have to go undercover and be really embedded there in a way. So I found out about the school, which was run by evangelical Christians. So I ended up posing as a teacher, posing as an evangelical Christian.
So the university was run by evangelical Christians who were sort of undercover in the country, and you were an undercover teacher. It was just layers of undercover.
Well, it's a very complicated situation to try to explain, obviously, because this group of fundamental evangelical Christians that fund the school, $35 million to build and a lot more to operate, they have made a deal, some sort of an official deal, to not proselytize. They'll go there and build a school, but because proselytizing is an executionable crime. Mm-hmm. And we have seen that where people get detained there. But those are different. The ones who get detained are the ones who went in there under tourist visa. These are the people who go to North Korea on a tourist visa and take videos and put it on a YouTube. There's a lot of actually these. You just pay money and you can go as a tourist. It's not a big deal to go to North Korea that way. But they end up passing Bibles out. So those people will be detained, no question about it. But the group I was with was working with the regime, cooperating with the regime. Their deal was they're gonna basically fund the education of the future leaders of North Korea, hoping one day they will be converted. A perfect population, really, because it's actually a very, very devoutly faithful people to their cause. I mean, the great leader. So when that great leader falls, they will actually convert to the next religion. So, they made that deal, so they are not, the regime knows exactly who they are. Mm-hmm. They just do not proselytize. So it's just not out in open. So when I went in there with them, I was, I guess, posing as one of them, but also they were kind of posing as not being Christians when they were out in open. So it was a very double situation.
And this line, I think what I got from the book was that the students are very apt at lying as well. They're very good at lying, and they lie to you constantly almost. And so it just felt, with the students lying and the teachers lying and you lying, it just felt like a lot of lying.
Truth and lies was really a big theme. It's interesting because I just gave a TED Talk in Vancouver, and the theme of this year was where the Google founder was, supposedly, somewhere in the crowd. But their big theme was truth and lie, and that's the talk I gave. And it's because the whole world is built on lies. Entire system of the great leader. This entire country runs according to the myth of the great leader. And if that is a lie, then where do you begin to know the truth? And in order to discover the truth, I also had to pretend to be something I'm not in order to get to the truth. So the question of truth and lies does become a really important thing when you go more and more, I guess, research into the topic of North Korea.
And so who were the pupils that you were teaching for
It ended up being, I didn't know this going in 2011, which was Juche year 100. What that means is they count the calendar system. Juche is the North Korea's foundational philosophy, meaning self-reliance, which is why they're so isolated, because they don't rely on anybody else. So that they also count the calendar system according to their original great leader's birth which, so their calendar was different. So 2011 was actually Juche year 100. Although he died in 1994, to celebrate his birthday, despite the fact he died, they shut down every university across North Korea and sent all the university students into construction fields to build North Korea's biggest idea, which is a powerful and prosperous nation, which is what they call themselves. To build that, they sent all the kids to construction fields except 270 young men who are the sons of elite. And those were the boys. I mean, they're 19 and 20, but those were the young men I ended up living with in this private location where nobody was allowed out of the premise.
Excuse me. So what did you discuss with them? You were teaching them English. You weren't it was a science university, but you weren't teaching them science. And what was sort of the day-to-day interactions with them? What were you allowed
this goes back to the truth and lies question. It's a university of science and technology, but there were no science teachers. A lot of their majors were computer, but they didn't know the existence of the internet. So I did see people actually, but towards the end, they showed me a student facing with a Google page, actually. And like he was Googling something, but when you talk to him afterward, like they didn't know. They would ask questions like, how many movies can you watch on the internet? Yeah. And how long is a movie that you see on internet? Like that kind of questions to me, just clearly they're not on the internet. So it was, this was sort of the daily existence of that school. Everything was watched 24/7. Minders lived in the same building as the teachers. Counterparts were these people who oversaw all the lesson plans because you had to get everything approved. Every class was recorded and reported on. I had meals 3 times a day with the students, and it's me and 3 students at each table. And that conversation was reported on because they were watching each other. So they have these critique meetings at least once a week where they then report on what they've heard, what they have witnessed. So it really there wasn't a single place you could be where you had any privacy. And I taught English. That's the only subject that got taught in that school. But their schedules were mapped out. So they did tons and tons of great leader duties and great leader studies. And then they learned English. And it was just repetition of that. It was a soldier-like existence for them.
How much of the outside world could you discuss with them? Did you try and sort of...
There were rules and rules, as you can imagine. The rules and just went on. And they just went from, you couldn't wear jeans because Kim Jong-il really hated jeans because they were a symbol of America. So not allowed in that country. But the things like, do not compare ever. Like, you wouldn't say, oh, it's amazing, it's like this, because back home in my country, like, that's not allowed. Don't ever suggest there's anything wrong with their country. Okay. It was another one. Never ever discuss the outside world. Do not ever talk to somebody outside when you're taken on a trip outside, which teachers were taken on trips on weekend just to get groceries. Or great leader site buildings, because every building is about great leader in North Korea. So there were all these rules to follow. So there was nothing you could talk about about the outside world. But when you live with someone for months and months and months, and as a teacher, where I could assign things with an approval, but I assigned letters, I assigned essay writing, and compositions through those things, and also daily conversation over meals, things start slipping out and escaping, and thoughts. It was really more thoughts. People ask me, did you see, North Koreans starving? And I don't know why people are so curious about that, because we know there's a 80% food shortage. I don't think that's what was fascinating. Yes, I was taken out of the Pyongyang on a school bus, and you can guess those things from looking at the really, really malnourished people out in the distance. They're not gonna let you talk to them, but you can see that. But I think it's more what this kind of society does to an individual psychologically, I think is more what I was there to find out, which did become, as we were bonding, me and my students more and more, I think I did get glimpses of their world more.
I think what surprised me about reading the book was how even the elite, they fear the society and they play by the rules. I think I'd assumed that those in the elite perhaps knew the game, knew what was going on, and would be able to speak more freely, but they weren't able to.
I think it's amazing how in the rest of the world we get these reports of North Koreans are all sneaking DVDs and watching soap operas, and they're all like on cell phones, and that I didn't see. Even if they did not show that to me, I didn't see how that was going on so rampantly in that country, because what I saw was such a tight control and such a lack of knowledge. Even if they saw some forbidden video somewhere, it's very clear to me they just had no concept of how. For example, we all had to, in the Korean culture, you make kimchi. I don't know if you guys know what that's, a Korean dish that every family eats. And then we make this massive kimchi in November, and which North Koreans do too. And we all peeled garlics together. But this was actually where it was really complex. Because I felt like, that age, 19-year-old college students, boys, to get all of them to peel garlic so diligently would be very hard in America. I don't know about England, but that would be nearly impossible. But they were so really, earnestly peeling garlic, because they said if we all make kimchi together, it would be quicker. So those were, I think, positive moments of what I observed. Even if that's obedience, there was something that was really heartwarming. But at the same time, they would ask me things like, we had this really lovely moment where they then began discussing, because it's a family tradition in Korea, everybody makes kimchi together in November. And they said, their family gets like 8 kilos of cabbages delivered from the government. And then depending on the size of the family, another family gets 12 kilos of cabbages government sends. And he said to me, actually the group of them asked me, they said, so what about you, professor? Like how many kilos does your government send cabbages they send you? And I was like, in Manhattan, where I live, no, the New York City government is not sending me cabbages to make kimchi every November. And I think it was moments like that where I thought, this is not faking. This is not a government propaganda. They really have no idea. And there were a lot of moments like that, which does make you realize the amount. And these were the best and the brightest. And so there were a lot of moments like that where it just was a different way, and they were not getting information about the outside world.
So the campus that you were on was, I think one of the things I picked out was that it was guarded by female guards, which I would have thought putting 19 and 20-year-old young men with their female equivalents would have been a recipe for disaster, but it didn't.
It didn't actually. That, as far as I know, I didn't see them ever mixing, and those women never talk back to me. I basically don't really know what the girls are like in North Korea, because my only point of reference were these boys. And from what I understood, because I was very curious about that, that supposedly why the school is allowed to be built is really many, many reasons, obviously, one of which is government propaganda. So that the foreign media can come in for a couple of days and film the school, and the school looks fantastic, and the kids look really healthy and beautiful. Then they can turn around and say North Korea looks like this, which it does not. So when they did get male soldiers there to guard the place, I don't know what they need guarding from or to, because obviously we're just not allowed out. So I felt like it was the guards were to make sure we did not escape. Actually, they were not protecting us. It was the other way around. But they basically didn't want men soldiers because they said it looked too threatening, whereas women soldiers are not threatening to foreign eyes, supposedly. So that was the reason. And another reason nothing happened between the boys and the girls is because there's such a class difference in North Korea. It's called sangbun, and the family difference. Basically, the girls came from much lower class than the boys, and they just would not be interested in each other. They're not the kind of people who mix in that world. So that's what I understood it to be.
And what was your relationship like with the minders, those who were sort of watching over what you did? And an extension, sort of how How much did you feel watched, your emails, your phone calls, and so forth?
Well, being in North Korea is just a constant surveillance. So I don't know if there was a camera. I know definitely it was tapped because they would know the conversations. Or the minders, we were told the teachers had email and internet. The students didn't even know what it was.
Okay.
So even though our dorms were right next to each other, we were in a different world, really. And our emails, the teachers' emails, we were told by the administrators of the school who are running the school, told us to basically set up a different email when you go into North Korea because they can really easily go into your accounts and stuff. And you don't really want them to have all your friends' emails too. I feel like my friends would have all disowned me, if their privacy was jeopardized like that. So in these emails that you send home, we were told to just keep it minimum so that people know you're safe. But the minders knew, it was a monitor connection. So like I would say, for example, I woke up today at 4 a.m. whatever, and then like the minder would repeat that to me. He would say, "Oh, so did you get up at 4 a.m. this morning? You must be tired." So that does just wipe out any sense of that. Then another thing I realized there, they do have letters in North Korea, for example, letter system, postal system. But when I talked to my students, they didn't really know what letters were. They didn't know how to write it. They didn't really send them. And I realized these communication methods, we need privacy. Letters do lose meaning. Emails do lose meaning when everybody else can see it. Or it's like the authority that can punish you is looking it over. Then that means of communication lose that meaning. And that was a very, even for teachers having email access wasn't really the same as having email access here.
I quite like the story where you were very keen to get them to watch Harry Potter. Mm-hmm. And there was an argument with the teachers who wanted to show them the Chronicles of Narnia again. And I like that perhaps you could talk about the differences with the other teachers there, and also why the pupils were so keen to watch the Harry Potter films. It connected them to the world.
It's not, I don't want you to misunderstand. It's not like I'm a fan. I'm not a Harry Potter fan. But my students just did not have access to anything. None. They were not allowed out. They were not allowed to keep in touch with their family. They had nothing. Basically, I'm the only thing they had. I realized more and more and more. I really felt motherly towards them. And they, one by one, towards the end, kept asking me about Harry and Ron and Hermione. And I was like, did these kids, where did you learn this? And it only is because in that school, the textbook was chosen very carefully. That was approved. But it was an old, dated textbook that was once used in China. So anything that was used in China, the North Korean government let it go. It was very, very dated. It was just like, but those ESL textbooks have little passages. And in those passages were so dated, they would talk about like paying for something with a $2 personal check in the US and things like that. And I would have to just say, actually, we don't do that anymore. But they actually talked about Harry Potter in one of those textbooks, supposedly. And because they had so little, I realized a little information about the outside world, they really soaked it up like a sponge. So all of them knew that there was this phenomenon outside that they had no idea about called Harry Potter. The things they knew was Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, and what is that? The sports that they do, Quidditch or something?
Quidditch, yeah.
Quidditch, yeah, Quidditch, and then Harry and Ron and Hermione. But they would ask me things like, so is Quidditch really fun? And I would be like, no, I don't play that. But so they were really keen on this. And then by chance, I found out one of my colleagues younger colleagues, actually from England, had one of the Harry Potter movies on her, like a DVD. So then I applied to teach that to the counterparts because I said it's mentioned in the textbook. So in order to finish my lesson, it's important. It's detrimental to my lesson that they understand what it is. And then it was actually miraculously approved, which I couldn't believe. So the words just went around the campus. They all were so excited. All day I would get, like every day, it's like, so when are we watching Harry and Hermione and Ron? And then my colleagues, the evangelical fundamental Christian group, because there were degrees in that group. Some were so much more orthodox than others. So more senior ones actually came to me and said, this is unacceptable, it's not going to happen. because they said they were now aiming for Narnia. And Narnia, I've never seen it, but Narnia has a very religious tone to it, overtone to it. So they absolutely forbade me, and they applied to teach Narnia, which then got rejected by the North Korean counterparts. So it was suddenly a battle between Narnia and Harry Potter. And Narnia, once it got rejected, I was given a choice. The Orthodox group, they really felt that it was filth. So I had this crying moments just arguing with them, because I was like, I don't think Harry Potter is evil. And they were like, it's filth. So yeah, I mean, it was like, and my heart broke, I think, because it was so censored. You know, my kids, they couldn't have one or the other, because it was complete censorship. They were just not allowed this information. And I was given a choice to show either one or the other. I taught two groups. Out of 270 young men, 50 were in my direct charge. So these are the kids that were like my babies, 50. And there were two groups of them. And my colleagues, the fundamental evangelicals, said, choose one group, then you can show it. So it was this really, it was a horrible choice to make, because I did have to choose one group of boys. And I did battle with that decision, because I thought, you know, how can I break their hearts like that? Because they were so disappointed. And I thought, you know, better show it to one group than none. That was a choice that had to be made, like a Sophie's choice. But they did see it. They marveled at watching it. And I thought they would talk about things like the special, because it was the third one, which is really like dramatic, third installment. So I thought they would be more fascinated by that. But in fact, what was amazing is because I had just been teaching essay writing to them. And essay writing, by the way, was impossible to teach, because they didn't understand the whole concept of coming on with an argument and proving it with an evidence. That's what essays are about. And that was impossible there, because critical thinking is just not allowed. So we've been battling with essay writing so much. So when we watched Harry Potter, there's a scene where Hermione says, I have to write essays for Professor Snape's class. And the whole, that's the moment the boys talked about. They're like, Hermione has to write an essay too, like us. And I really thought, this is what the government is denying them of. Basically, it was the connection. It was the first time, I think, they saw a Western film that they were, they only get allowed things like March of Penguins and Lion King, because those are there's like a nature film or the cartoon. This was like a people film. And that's what they latched onto, was the connection, I thought. They really connected with these kids, like them. And I thought, that's what their government is denying them. You know, complete blocking them from relating to the rest of the world. It was a heartbreaking moment.
Do you want to show us some photos that we've got lined up?
I think a lot of them already got shown somehow from that, but we can just sort of...
And then after that, we'll take some questions.
Yeah.
There's a mic in the middle to go.
Okay, so that's like in 2002 when I first arrived in Pyongyang, and that was actually 60th birthday celebration of Kim Jong-il. So she's holding the sign, son of the 21st century, and that's referring to their great leader, because great leader's birthday is the day of the sun. So that's the original great leader, Kim Jong-il, who died in 1994, and that's his entire philosophy, Juche, is what North Korea is based on. And that's Kim Jong-il flowers, because all the great leaders have flowers invented for them. So this was Ministry of Railways display of Kim Jong-il flowers to celebrate Kim Jong-il's 60th birthday. There were hundreds of these displays, and I got taken to Kim Jong-il flower exhibition, where I was given an explanation about every single of those displays, which I think might sound really fascinating, but after I tell you, after about like 7 or 8, it's all the same. It's all about the same flowers and same theme. You see another one like that. I mean, there were so many of these. These are the Workers' Party leaders back in 2002 when I went in. I had to do karaoke with those guys. And that was a whole other experience, which I had to write about for New York Review of Books.
What did they sing? What did you?
They were singing, obviously, the only theme. What do you think their songs were about? Obviously, the great leader. I actually, the only song allowed, I couldn't sing any American songs, obviously, no English songs. I don't know any North Korean songs. I could, but that would have just seemed weird, for me to suddenly, start singing North Korean songs. But the only South Korean song allowed was actually a protest song against the dictator regime back in 1970s. And I thought that was also very fascinating. Songs that was actually about a different time. In South Korea, which also had a dictatorship back in 1970s against the government, youth protest song, now that was used for propaganda in North Korea later on, which I thought was fascinating. Every mountain you get taken to, well, I was only got taken 2 mountains, but they're the most famous mountains. And I think this is the case with the rest of the mountains there. Every surface has those Kim Jong-il stuff carved directly on the surface of the mountain. I think in Kumgangsan, which is South Korea's, entire Korean Peninsula's most famous mountain, has 4,000 such carvings all across the surface. So even the nature belongs to the great leader. And generally, it's saying things like the great hero or Kim Jong-il and stuff like that. It's not really that complicated what it says. That's my kids. I think they're taking an exam. It's like a typical classroom. So yeah, that was like a lesson. That's where the great leaders, now there are 2 of them, but are embalmed. So you go in there, and you have to bow to him, and he's basically lying there embalmed. And it's very, very cold inside, obviously, because there's a dead body in there. That's them watching Harry Potter in my class. And you can only project a movie very small there, I realized, because there's no blank space anywhere. And so those are Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung sayings, whatever they said. It's often like, our country is the greatest. It's all stuff like that. It's not also that complicated. So those are in every room. There's those kind of famous sayings by great leaders or their portraits. And you cannot move them. So if you can't move them, there is no full blank space anywhere. So you have to just show it half the size that you either could watch in a big movie. We saw that before, but that walkway, I realized as I spent time there, made sure that there was no privacy because you are seen everywhere because there are windows on either side of that. So wherever you are seen. So that's my kids, a set of my kids doing great leader duty. So there was a building on campus that was basically a great leader, Kim Il-sung-ism study hall. So that's where you go and study the study of the great leader, and they went there every day to learn great leader studies. And 6 students took turns to guard it 24/7. So even if it's like minus 40 degrees, you stand outside, guard the building. It's an empty building, and they put on basically the party uniform in order to guard the building because it's a holy duty. So my last day there, Kim Jong-il died. And that was a coincidence. So I witnessed the whole reaction to Kim Jong-il's death, and that's their only newspaper announcing the death of Kim Jong-il, which I ended up actually getting a copy of.
As you were leaving?
As I was leaving, yeah.
Any questions? As you move to the mic, I will ask one question. Do you think that it's a good thing or a bad thing that tourism to North Korea is increasing? Obviously, there's giving the money to tourism, yeah.
I'm against it, personally. That's my personal opinion. I think different engagement methods are probably necessary. But tours, I don't know what there is to tour about. I don't know about the whole, they call them torture porn or something. I think there's a term for that, voyeurism with poverty tours. And it's a gulag, pretending to be a nation. And that money the tourists spend, it might seem curious, but it's not that curious because you get taken to the exact 4 or 5 sites, and it's just not that funny. North Korea is literally a gulag, pretending to be a nation, and every penny you spend there will go directly to the regime to suppress and torture and execute their people. So I do think actually that tourist money is bolstering the regime.
Okay.
I'm really curious about storytelling. You mentioned that you showed Harry Potter to them, and I'm curious about because you only showed it to one class, and I'm wondering, was it retold to the other class, and like how did that story kind of propagate, and how does storytelling generally work within that kind of environment?
You mean, what do you mean, the storytelling of whatever happens? I mean, it's an important method there. One of the things actually they did to amuse themselves, which seems really, they're kind of too old for it, 19 and 20, but they did tell stories to amuse themselves because there's nothing else. So they told me in evenings, there was like a little free time they gathered to watch their television, which is all about the great leader. So I think like a lot of times with the TV on, they did little games and stuff, but they said they would do stories. Like they would make like one is playing a boy, like almost like a theater, but they would tell stories, like little made up theater in order to entertain themselves. I mean, it seems so not 2015 kind of an amusement, but they did do that. So it is actually, I think, a way they do entertain themselves there.
Hi, fascinating stuff, thanks so much. I wondered just a bit more about sort of whether or not, like your sense of whether or not people actually question anything, because you talked about the fact that they are totally isolated. That isn't like some fake, they just don't know what's going on outside. But do you get any sense that they're actually beginning to question what's going on? Like, what are they looking for? For example, when they couldn't watch Harry Potter, that class, the authorities had said no. Is that something that actually upset them and made them think about it, or did they just have total sort of obedience to the leadership?
It is there. Of course, it's there, the doubt against the regime. But it is so squashed that, there are different levels of that. Number one is actually something that we didn't finish talking about, which is lies. My students lied all the time. And there were different levels of lies. One, they lied because they were always fearful of, like the guard duty, for example. They would do those guard duties and they would say they didn't do it, although I saw them do it. So it was such a lie that made no sense. Or they would say like, I cloned a rabbit in 5th grade. And just these nonsense lies. But I think they were regurgitating those lies. Or sometimes they lied out of habit. So this whole lying culture does make it very difficult to see what's really going on. And that's a part of the whole propaganda thing. When you constantly have to pretend to do something else, it creates a shield and you can't really see what's going on. So that lying culture made that really difficult. But I think the more and more I was there, I did think there were slight questions. Why? Because they would ask me. Of course, they could see that I'm traveling freely and they're not. They're not even allowed to leave their... None of those kids had ever been to any of those mountains. These are elite. They've never been to their country's most famous mountains because they're not allowed. So I think they did question that. But the questions that, I think this is probably a best way to think about. I think 2 ways, it's probably easiest to think about that question, which gets asked most often. How much do they really know? I think humanity is not that different anywhere. But this is all they've known and born into. So even though they might question for a second, within that context, I think if you think of them as the most abused household, so if you've basically been born and bred in endless abuse, physically and emotionally, psychologically beaten every single day, that I think it is really hard to fathom what else is there. So there's that level, but I think also the control that they have, making sure you don't move physically, because you're not allowed to move anywhere. Make sure you don't share any information because you're not allowed. And I think that just like binds you. You become helpless. There's not much you can do. And I think also the punishment is so great when there's a gulag and there's public execution, and also you report on each other. So I think that all those doubts, I did see little inklings of it, but it gets squashed so quickly. It's just like there's not it's like so rapid. It's a moment of a flicker and it's gone. And I think it's because punishment is, and so an answer to that, I think it's like us. It's not that different on some level, but it's so tremendously different. And the punishment is beyond what we can fathom. And if you are living in a gulag, and one thing you say wrong would get you and your family and everyone you know killed, then you would probably not express more than a second.
just another super quick question, which may just be a yes or no, is do you think this regime will fall in our lifetimes?
I mean, the world has been questioning that. So I don't think they say that authoritatively, but having studied this topic as long as I could stand it, and having been there, I've also talked to all the defectors, traveled all the surrounding regions. I mean, I've just been following it for over a decade. And I just feel like that's up to us. I think I did come to a conclusion by living in there. I don't know if it could come from inside. You might see little flickers, but that flicker gets squashed so quickly. I think whoever talks about North Korea Spring, compare it to Arab Spring, or compare it to Cuba, compare it to East Germany, West Germany, all of that, I personally think that's nonsense, because we've never seen anything like this. A gulag concentration camp in existence for 70 years, that's a different animal altogether. Goes back to why backpacking touring into North Korea, I'm against it. So I don't know if it could fall on its own, but I do think, I find it one of the reasons for writing this book, and it is a bit nutty thing to do, to go in there, I think, undercover, but I just find it morally unacceptable that world is there and the rest of us are here. There's something really deeply disturbing about that. I think just humanity in general, because I think it's horrific. So I don't know. I don't think they can do it on their own, but I think the world can maybe make that happen. I think first step is caring about the issue, and then maybe something will change. I don't know, but I think it's up to us.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, thanks for being here today. My question has to do with academic curriculum. I wonder if you can expound a bit about, if you know, what the average 14-year-old learns. And the reason I ask is because, it's been said that knowledge is power and all this. I think of a subject like math, where it can be taught rotely and you learn the facts and it never sort of expands your mind into the world, one interpretation. But something like literature or economics, how can you learn those subjects without thinking about the world? And is it done that way?
I mean, I think that's another, because people do ask me about like reunification. What do I think? And I think that goes back to that education thing. Like, where do we begin? Because what I saw there was, it's not possible to teach economics and literature without bringing the world in there. So if they have the basic information, they were so bright. I mean, they learned English so quickly. They worked so hard. But their general knowledge had a gap that I just could not understand. They thought scientists changed blood type A to B, a North Korean scientist, of course. So if you teach that to students in a science class, or they said basketball, they learn basketball makes them grow taller. So, it's basically teaching nonsense, because in order to teach economics or science or any of these things, how can you teach computer without telling them about Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg or the internet or any of it? So I did not feel, and the literature out of question. The only book they are allowed to learn that is not North Korean was Disappeared with the Wind, Gone with the Wind, which is about North and South Civil War, where North wins. There's all reasons why only that information is allowed. So, what literature do they know? Only the great literature. So I don't think that education as we know it exists there, because their system is designed in order to uphold the myth of the great leader. In order to uphold that, they need to make their students dumb. And that was really difficult to stomach, because they were so bright, they were so sweet, so lovely. They just did not know much of anything.
Thank you.
Hi, Suki. My name is Arvid. I had a quick question about the Harry Potter movie again. I was wondering, was the parts of the movie censored? Because I know it's a fictional movie, so I guess that's why it was allowed, because it kind of shows a fictional world. But the beginning of the movie shows parts of London, people taking a train, and they're living in houses and interacting with each other. I was wondering, were those parts of the movie completely censored, or?
No, amazingly, the North Korean staff just let it happen.
Okay. So
Because I think it was mentioned in the textbook. So they were just kind of bureaucrats with that one. Luckily, passed it. I mean, they could have easily said no. But I think some of it, I was thinking at the time, because it's also a little mythical. The whole, it's not kind of real London, is it? Obviously not. It's Harry Potter's London. So I think that's why it was kind of magic thing made it better than like a normal today's London visuals, which they wouldn't have wanted.
one other question: was the movie screened in English or?
Yeah, because they were learning English.
Okay.
So that was a part of an English lesson.
And I saw on the picture there was text. So is that North Korean text, so they could understand, or were they speaking fluently English?
What do you mean text? There was.
I think on the picture there was subtitles, or.
The pictures didn't have a subtitle. I think it was my writing to explain maybe in Korean or something. No, there was no subtitle. No, they understood the movie.
Yeah.
Their English was very good.
And last question, it might be a more personal question. I was wondering, do you ever, coming back to the Western world and writing this book and speaking about your experience, do you ever feel like that you're threatened or exposed? Like
Me?
Yeah.
Well, that was always a part of the whole thing. I think, obviously, being there was the worst of it.
Yeah.
Consequences were frightening. So once I started following this topic and deciding to write a book, that scary part of it, which I was scared every single day of being there, and sometime after when the book was coming out, I was getting threats. Was scary.
So were you getting like emails from the government?
I was getting emails from the head of that school,
Okay.
who are working with the regime to absolutely stop publication, send the manuscript to them, and it was threatening.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Do you regret that you can't go back?
Oh, I'm not going back.
No, but do you regret that you can't go back again?
No, because I think that I feel like I poured myself into it. This whole project took, I think, 12 years from the beginning, and I threw everything I know into this book on the topic. So there isn't really much more I can say at the moment. I think I got to understand it, I think, as I possibly humanly could. So I think if I do go back, maybe something would have changed in that world or something in a different circumstances, so I can find different truth.
We'll take these questions, but make them shorter. Okay.
My question is actually related to fear as well, because presumably those kids must live under such constant fear all the time and distress. Did you see it manifested in any way?
Did you stress what?
Did you see it manifested? How did it
The
manifest?
fear, how did it manifest? The fears manifested, the fears were every second. The fears, I think it's amazing. Human beings, one of the most primal feelings that we can sense is fear. And I felt that so strongly there. So, very, very tiny moment. It's in the book. When they say, what do you sing when you all get together to celebrate birthday? Because that's what they do, or do storytelling. And they said, songs about the great leader. And one time, one student said rock and roll. And the whole table froze. And that moment was absolute fear. Like my heart sank when he said that. Because he just looked around to see who else heard it. And I looked around, and I remember just my whole body, my feet felt cold, because I realized that he could be punished because of this. We all changed the topic instantly, but it was moments like that, something so tiny. But the fear there was palpable. You could touch it.
Hi, Suki. Thank you for your really fascinating talk. I just wanted to ask you, have you been involved in any political activism off the back of all the attention that the book is getting? Because I can imagine, we talk about the Holocaust and the Second World War, constantly, even to this day. And like you mentioned, this is even greater than that. It's been going on for 70 years. So, and we still talk about the guilt about how come we didn't go into help Poland, Netherlands, all the Second World War still. And this is on a much bigger scale. So did the book affect anything politically? Is there any move into maybe the UN or the US or anyone going in there of the
I think, it's my job. the best I could do was vividly deliver that world in the deepest way I know how to the world, so the world can feel. I always said the purpose was to humanize North Korea. So if through this book, if people can actually feel human feelings towards the people there, 25 million people who've now become, sadly, part of Kim Jong-un jokes, which are really tiresome. And so I think that as a writer, that's the most I can do. And also bring back another one that the reason we have North Korea is because there was a Korean War. And the truth about the Korean War, which the world calls forgotten war, and this forgotten war, millions of people got separated and died. And where it really began has a lot to do with actually the Second World War remapping of colonial power, starting with the UK actually, and China, and ultimately the US and Soviet Union. And that remapping created the division of two Koreas. It's never a civil war. And how it affected that decision that began from the Cairo conference, where it began in 1943 with remapping, and how it resulted in the division of a country. And that ended up separating millions of families and created today's North Korea. And I thought, all I can do is to relate that in a readable way so that people begin thinking about it and thinking a little more deeply about why we have this tragedy today. And I don't know, political activism. I think that's for activists to do. As a writer, all I can do is write the best book I know how on the topic.
Thank you very much again. Given that your students can be quite directly linked to you, even if you try to cover things up in the book, it seems that there's a risk for them. Do you know if there have been any consequences for your students?
The consequences from this book was something that was brought up from the beginning, right away. It was obviously the foremost on my mind. People questioned a lot the consequences for actually the evangelical Christians who brought me in. Clearly that group works with the government. So it's not like the fact they were missionary was ever a secret. I didn't out them. I'm sure it's unpleasant for them to have the book come out because it's made probably things difficult. But I thought the book was worth it, but it was not gonna sabotage them in any way that has to do with real consequences. I would think probably money-wise, it might have been hard for them on some level to have to raise more money for the regime on some level. But kids, the students, was my foremost concern. They were really like my kids.
Yeah.
And I felt, of course, everything about them is blurred and edited out so that you can't tell who's who at all. Apart from that, when you read the book, the kids come across loyal to the regime. So there basically is nothing to fault them as an entire group, which is how they come across. They're just, and it was hard to do because individually they were so adorable, and they were all, as a writer, doing characterization. There were just little habits and little sayings, little dialogues that happened there that was just so lovely, and I wanted to portray that unique lovability. But that had to be sacrificed so that they become very blurry one group of people who are loyal to the regime. So I think I protected them. I felt confident with that.
Excellent, thank you.
Last question.
Hi, Suki. Thank you very much for your talk. My question was regarding something you wrote at the beginning of your book, where you said when you came to New York from South Korea, you felt this was not home. And then you went back to South Korea for a bit, and you didn't feel that was home either. Did you get some sense of closure from having done this project to yourself?
Yes and no, I think. I think that when you do lose home, and I think that loss is something that is, that obviously was a motivation for writing the book, but was also, is a bigger question, even in the whole history of the two Koreas. I think when you do lose home as a child, I don't know if you can get that back. But I guess through writing, you look for it. And that search is a temporary way to appease that, lost feeling. But I'm not sure if I did get the closure. As far as looking for truth, for injustice of that world, I think I did get a closure because it was never satisfying to go. I did cover the New York Philharmonic in Pyongyang, for example. There was nothing to write about that unless I wanted to be a publicist for North Korea's regime, which I really think that's what they want. All these articles about North Korea that comes out after like a 3-day trip is what I could manage to do. But I think by living there and understanding the place deeper, that closure did happen through this book.
Thank you.
Cool. Please join me in thanking Suki Kim for coming.